I was treated like a mistake by my family, but I fought and overcame the pain that almost destroyed me. I remember coming home after school and feeling invisible. The noise of the television, Daniel's laughter, and the heavy silence my parents maintained with me made me shrink into the corner of the living room. There was no look of pride, no words of encouragement. I was just there. I grew up this way, thinking my worth depended on being someone they never recognized. My name is Rogerio. I'm 35, and I spent years trying to understand why my own family's love seemed so selective. Clarice and Alvaro always praised Daniel, their youngest, as if he were the embodiment of everything they hoped for. Meanwhile, I felt like a walking mistake. I remember lying in my room at night, feeling the weight of the silence, hearing laughter from the kitchen, and thinking that maybe I really was invisible. My parents never said, "I'm proud of you," but the words they did say were sharp. Failure, deserter, disgrace to the family. Those words pierced my mind in a way I still feel today. I tried to fit in, do activities, get good grades, but it all felt like it wasn't enough. Every compliment my brother gave me felt like a punch in the gut, and I wondered if I would ever feel like I truly mattered. When I decided to join the military, it was more than a career choice. It was a silent cry saying, I exist, I can be someone. Deep down, I wanted to prove to them that I was worth something, even if it was through my own efforts. The feeling of being invisible accompanied me through every training session, every mission, every step I took. The first months away from home was strange. Freedom felt like a double-edged sword. I could finally escape that critical gaze, that crushing silence, but the absence only seemed to reinforce what I felt. Being left out became even more painful when no one noticed my struggle. Sending messages from home was painful. I wrote neutral, in things, cold letters, so as not to show weakness, but even so, no one responded as I expected. Loneliness followed me like a shadow, and I began to question whether I could truly find any meaning in being recognized. Every mission I completed, every risk I faced, seemed to have no effect on what I wanted most, the simple recognition of who I was by my own family. The height of loneliness came during an operation that nearly cost me my life, as I crawled across the battlefield, feeling the heat of blood and dust. I remembered the coldness at home. I'd remembered a night when my brother laughed at a gift I'd brought back from a trip, and my parents said nothing to me, but applauded Daniel. Anger mixed with fear consumed me. My hands trembled, my heart pounded, and the urge to give up nearly overwhelmed me. Why did I care so much about the opinions of people who had never seen my efforts? But anger also drove me. Every mission, every risk, every battle was an attempt to prove something. Perhaps no one would see. Yet somewhere inside me, a silent conviction began to grow. I needed to fight, not just for their recognition, but for myself. That thought was the seed of what would come later, something that would grow slowly with pain, mistakes, and small victories. Isabel came into my life during this dark period, not promising to heal every wound, but offering something I'd never received: genuine attention. She knew every scar I had, not just the visible ones, but the ones I carried in my soul. I remember the first time she looked at me after a mission, and instead of praising bravery or heroism, she asked how I was truly doing. That disconcerted me. No one, not even my parents, had ever asked that question sincerely. I felt my entire body relax, something I hadn't done in years. Her presence was an anchor, and with her, I began to learn that self-worth doesn't depend on applause or external approval. Still, my parents' words resonated in my mind, reminding me that, for a long time, I would have to build my self-esteem alone, in silence, with fear, with anger, but also with the determination that only those who have been invisible know. That's when I began to realize that my life could take a different path, but it would take courage. Years of battles, victories, and defeats shaped me in ways no one at home seemed to notice. I became a colonel, juggling impossible lives, strategies, and decisions. Each successful mission filled me with pride, but there was still a void that not even medals could fill. Public recognition couldn't fill the void left by the absence of simple words. "I'm proud of you, Rogerio." I kept these achievements silent, sharing them only with Isabel, who became my safe haven. She smiled at my victories, wiped my tears in defeats, and reminded me that my worth didn't depend on the gaze of those who couldn't see beyond their own pride. And yet, I carried within me the wound of being seen as lesser, as a mistake. Each step in my military career was an attempt to validate my existence to myself and secretly to them. But I didn't yet know that the turning point was coming, and that my story wouldn't be defined solely by what they thought, but by what I chose to believe about myself. The turning point began unexpectedly with the intervention of my Aunt Lourdes. She showed up at home with an old album full of photos of me as a child. Many of them I hadn't even remembered. I remember the smell of aged paper and the strange feeling of being looked at with affection, something so far removed from the coldness I'd known. Lourdes began telling funny childhood stories, memories that made me laugh but also tore me apart. How could my parents forget so many moments? I felt a mixture of relief and fear. The relief of being remembered and seen, and the fear of waiting too long for something that might never come. When Clarice started participating, bringing photos Isabel had secretly sent, I realized there might be a chance to rebuild our relationship. For years, I'd harbored resentment, but there, seeing the emotion in my mother's eyes, something inside me began to give way. I hadn't expected it to be so painful, yet so liberating. Each recounted memory reminded me that, despite everything, I existed in a meaningful way for someone. It was an emotional shock to realize that the absence of affection for years didn't mean complete non-existence, but rather failures of perception, fear, and silence. The sensation was strange, as if I were learning to walk again in a territory that had always been mine, but had never explored. Daniel also began to open up. He confessed that he joined the Navy inspired by me, not to please our parents, as I'd always thought. The revelation was both a punch in the chest and a balm. All the anger I'd built up against him for being the perfect son began to dissolve. I realized he, too, was dealing with expectations and pressures he'd never shared. That moment shifted my perspective. The problem wasn't just with me or my parents, but with a family pattern that affected us all in different ways. Feeling empathy for him for the first time made me realize that part of my pain stemmed from the emotional isolation I'd imposed on myself. I began to understand that overcoming wasn't just about winning medals or titles, but about rebuilding relationships and learning to put myself in someone else's shoes. The anger was still there, but now there was room for understanding and dialogue. It was the first real step toward healing. For the first time, I felt like I could live a life where silence didn't define my self-worth. The pinnacle of change came on the day of my official award. Standing before my family, colleagues, and superiors was a mixture of pride and anxiety. My body trembled inside, and not just from nervousness. It was the weight of years of pain, frustration, and waiting about to be confronted. I remember feeling Isabel's hand squeezing mine, a simple gesture that gave me strength. When Alvaro said, "I'm proud of you, son," I felt something break inside me. All the unspoken words, all the moments I'd felt invisible, converged in that sentence. I cried unashamedly and realized that recognition isn't just about public applause, but about shared truth. That moment didn't erase years of silence, but it was proof that real change can happen, even after so long. The physical emotion was intense, my heart racing, my hands sweaty, tears streaming uncontrollably. I felt a huge weight lift from my shoulders and a lightness I hadn't felt in years. It was as if every emotional scar was finally touched by something human and genuine. The feeling of validation gave me strength that not even medals could offer. There I learned that it's never too late to be seen. Even with this victory, reconstruction wasn't immediate. I had to learn to manage my own expectations, not the approval of others. I learned to forgive myself for so many years of self-judgment and to accept that emotional wounds are processes, not events. Isabel was with me every step of the way, reminding me that strength isn't the absence of pain, but the ability to continue despite it. I began writing about my experiences, trying to transform pain into learning, anger into reflection, and suffering into action. It was solitary and intense work. Reliving old memories while trying to maintain my military career was exhausting but necessary. Each written account helped me understand my feelings, to bring order to the internal chaos. I discovered that telling my story, even to a select few, was liberating. Each typed word was a scar slowly healing, a recognition of myself that no one could take away. Gradually, the silence that imprisoned me was replaced by dialogue and understanding. The decision to found the Operation Truth Center arose from this need to transform pain into concrete action. I wanted to create a space for veterans and families who, like mine, suffered silence, trauma, and rejection. Working with people who understood my experiences brought a sense of belonging I never felt at home. Every story I heard, every tear shared, reinforced that my life had a purpose beyond medals and titles. Feeling that I could help others deal with invisible wounds gave me a greater mission. I learned to balance my emotions, recognize my limitations, and value small daily achievements. Rebuilding didn't mean forgetting the past, but learning to walk with it, understanding that despite the pain, there is always room for hope and change. Today, I look back on my life and see that even marked by years of silence and rejection, it is possible to overcome and build a legacy of truth, empathy, and self-love. Even after the decoration and my parents' recognition, the internal struggle continued. Some nights, when I lay next to Isabel, the silence would tighten again. It was as if all that past of coldness and disdain were etched into my skin, pulsing in memories that surfaced at the most unexpected moments. My body reacted physically, my chest tightened, my throat dry, my hands trembling. I had made progress, but I still carried deep scars. I often found myself reliving imaginary fights or mentally replaying every ignored gesture my parents made, trying to understand if that belated pride was genuine or just a formality. But over time, I realized I no longer needed to seek external approval to validate my existence. Every step I took alongside Isabel, every victory at the Operation Truth Center reminded me that my story didn't depend on anyone's gaze, but on my own ability to move forward. It was a painful but liberating process. The anger and hurt still lingered, especially on days when I remembered how my childhood was marked by a lack of affection. But now I could contain them, analyze them, and transform them into learning experiences. I learned that the silence of others doesn't have to define who we are, and that even with old wounds, it's possible to build a life of meaning, self-acknowledgement, and love. For years, my military missions taught me discipline, courage, and resilience, but nothing prepared my heart to deal with the emotional wounds. Each operation in which I nearly lost my life made me feel the fragility of existence, and it reminded me of the vulnerability I felt at home, ignored, invisible. The difference was that, on that battlefield, I had Isabel, colleagues, and shared experiences. At home, it was just me and the shadow of contempt. I remember one time, during a risky mission, when my hands trembled and my heart beat wildly, thinking the words I never heard, "I'm proud of you, Rogerio." I realized that this lack of recognition was a wound that wouldn't heal with medals or external achievements alone. The hardest war was within me. Little by little, I began to face this emotional battle as I faced any operation, with focus, courage, and strategy, even when fear and anger threatened to paralyze me. Learning to manage my emotions was as intense as any risk I faced outside of home. Isabel was always my safe haven, but also my mirror. She reflected my insecurities and my achievements, showing me that my worth didn't depend on external applause. When I started working at the Operation Truth Center, I saw clearly how my experiences could help others face silence and rejection. Each veteran who came to me carried memories that mirrored my own. Hearing their stories was painful, but also strengthening. I realized that even with pain, there was always a path to rebuilding. This realization made me see my life from a different perspective. It's not just about overcoming the past, but about transforming negative experiences into tools for empathy and action. The physical sensation of helping someone, sweaty palms, rapid breathing, heart pounding with emotion, became my new fuel. I finally understood that my scars, once a source of shame, were now my strength. The relationship with my parents was still delicate. Some conversations were tense, others charged with pent-up emotion. I still feared rejection, even when I felt proud of myself. The vulnerability was real, and admitting that I still felt pain was scary. But little by little, we learned to listen to each other, to share memories, and to laugh at old situations. Discovering that Daniel genuinely admired me was an unexpected relief and brought a new kind of closeness that had previously seemed impossible. The small daily victories began to add up, a sincere smile, a shared memory, a gesture of affection that had previously been absent. I realized that reconciliation doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be made up of small, consistent, sincere actions. My body relaxed, my mind rested, and I felt that life was finally making room for something true and lasting. The rebuilding process also taught me patience and self-compassion. I made mistakes. I struggled. I let anger guide me at times, but I realized that each stumble was part of the journey. The feeling of slowly moving toward healing, of feeling every muscle in my heart strengthen, was exhausting and transformative at the same time. I felt the weight of my family's history, the impact of years of silence, but also the lightness of beginning to write my own narrative. I learned that overcoming isn't about erasing memories, but about accepting them and consciously deciding what to carry and what to leave behind. Every deep breath, every frank conversation with Isabel or my parents, every mission at the Operation Truth Center was a step toward emotional freedom. Finally, I realized that my greatest victory wasn't military or public, but intimate. The ability to look at the past, feel the pain, and still choose to move on, love, and build something new. When I began to consider adopting a child with Isabel, I felt a whirlwind of emotions I had never faced before. On one hand, there was the joy and hope of building a new family. On the other, the fear of repeating patterns I myself had endured. I remember walking through the silent room, hands intertwined with Isabel's, and feeling my heart pound. Thoughts crept in. What if I fail? What if I'm not capable of giving the love I didn't receive? Each memory of my invisible childhood returned, bringing a tightness in my chest and tears I couldn't hold back. But looking at Isabel, I realized that strength lay not in the absence of fear, but in the ability to face every insecurity. I decided that being a father would be the opportunity to break the cycle of silence, to show that affection and recognition can be constant, not rarities. Physical fear transformed into creative energy, the tightness in my chest into determination. And little by little, each step I took toward fatherhood made me feel more whole, more capable, more human. The Operation Truth Center became my refuge and a place of continuous learning. Each veteran who arrived reminded me of moments I thought I would never overcome. Their stories echoed my own, and by helping them, I also helped myself. There were days when I felt exhausted, when listening to so much pain seemed to crush my own heart, but Isabel always reminded me that caring for others is also self-care. I remember feeling heavy breathing, trembling hands and teary eyes after intense sessions, but also experiencing a comforting warmth in my chest when I realized that my experience could transform lives. It was through this work that I understood that overcoming grief is not a destination, but a path of small daily achievements, of actions that strengthen body, mind, and soul. Each veteran who reconnects with family or finds inner peace becomes part of my own healing. I learned to celebrate every small gesture of progress at home as well. A genuine smile from Clarice, a memory shared by Daniel, or even a look from Alvaro that wasn't judgmental but rather accepting made me feel like the rebuilding was real. Every physical detail, a tight hug, clasped hands, a warmth in my chest, was more valuable than any medal or public recognition. I realized there was something powerful in feeling seen, heard, and validated, not through grand heroic acts, but through small displays of attention and affection. With each such gesture, I felt my body relax, my mind clear, and a sense of belonging slowly but surely take hold. It was the kind of silent victory few people see, but which changes everything from within. Still, the old pain didn't completely disappear. There were moments of remembrance, sadness, and anger, but I learned not to fight them, but to accept them as part of my process. I felt my chest tighten, unexpected tears well up, and my breathing become irregular, but now I had awareness and patience. I learned to listen to my own body, to identify when I needed to stop and take care of myself. Each tear became a lesson learned. Each heartache transformed into strength. Vulnerability became a powerful ally, allowing me to build truer relationships, work more intensely, and face the past with courage. The moment I realized my life had truly changed was simple and silent. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner with Isabel, and I felt a sense of peace I never imagined I would feel so fully. My body was relaxed, my thoughts aligned, and for the first time I felt I could breathe without carrying the weight of decades of rejection. Life still had challenges, but there was room for joy, affection, and dreams. In that moment, I understood that my greatest victory was not a medal, a successful mission, or recognition from my parents, but the ability to rebuild my life, my bonds, and my self-esteem. The physical sensation was one of lightness, a heart beating calmly and consistently, steady hands, and a peaceful mind. Overcoming at last had become real and tangible. Today, looking back, I see how much I've grown. Every emotional scar, every painful silence, every tear I've shed was part of the making of who I am. I remember the physical weight I felt in my chest when my parents ignored my efforts, the tightness in my throat when I heard sharp criticism, the tension in my shoulders that felt like it was carrying the world. But I also remember the warmth in Isabel's eyes, the tight hug from my Aunt Lourdes, the small empathy I began to cultivate with Daniel. Every physical and emotional sensation taught me that overcoming is not linear, not clean, but deeply real. Life taught me that even when wounded, invisible, or undervalued, there is always the possibility of writing a new story. Today, I feel my body relax in a way I haven't experienced in years, and my mind finally rest from its internal battles. The Operation Truth Center is a reflection of this learning. Working with veterans and families marked by silence shows me every day that we are not alone. Each story that reaches us reinforces that pain can transform into strength, that trauma can generate empathy, and that love can be built even when it seems absent. I remember the physical sensation after intense sessions, trembling hands, rapid breathing, a heavy heart, but also the quiet satisfaction of knowing that my experience saved or transformed lives. It was through this work that I understood that my true mission lay not only on the battlefield, but in the ability to give meaning to pain, transform suffering into action, and create space for others to find their own voice and recognition. There are still difficult days, moments when I remember the unspoken words, the coldness of the past, the fear of not being enough. In these moments, I feel my chest tighten, my mind lose itself in memories, and my entire body tense. But now, unlike in the past, I know I can face this. I've learned to breathe deeply, to lean on Isabel, to write, to speak, to embrace my emotions without fear. I've discovered that vulnerability is a strength, and that true overcoming involves accepting that we still feel pain, even when life improves. This balance is what allows us to live authentically, with affection, purpose, and hope. The greatest lesson I learned from this journey is that recognition and love may come late, but it's never too late to rebuild. I had to face years of invisibility, trauma, and rejection, but every step I took toward myself was essential. Today, I can look back on my life with pride, not for what I achieved for others, but for what I built for myself. The physical sensation of this accomplishment is calm and steady, a constant presence in body and mind, unlike the tightness and tension of before. Every breath is a reminder that despite the pain, the path to overcoming is possible, real and transformative. Looking to the future, I see plans and dreams that once seemed impossible. Adopting a child, continuing to help veterans, strengthening relationships, and living authentically. My heart feels light, my body energized, and my mind open to new experiences. I've learned that true victory isn't in medals or titles, but in being able to write a new story. A story where pain exists, but doesn't define who we are. This is the lesson I want to leave for those who read it. Even if you've been ignored, hurt, or forgotten, there's always a chance to overcome, to rebuild, and to allow yourself to be seen, loved, and recognized. Every courageous step, every tear, every conscious action counts. Life is possible, and so is overcoming.